How do you decide on what makes a fighter the greatest of all time, or GOAT? Is it the number of airframes produced? A long and storied service record? Or is it world-class performance? A fighter having any one of these would make the case for the GOAT. What if I told you there was one aircraft that nailed all three, plus it was a multi-role fighter? Meet the F-4 Phantom. This supersonic twin-engine beast not only marked the end of one generation of fighters, but it was so versatile it was replaced by multiple airframes. Today, we're taking a closer look at the legendary F-4 Phantom. Beloved by aircrews and maintainers alike, this aircraft earned nicknames among others such as Old Smoky, the Flying Anvil, the Lead Sled, and the St. Louis Slugger. The Phantom was so good it was flown by the Navy, Air Force, and Marines, making it the original Joint Strike Fighter. On top of that, the Phantom is the only aircraft to be flown by the Blue Angels and Thunderbirds. But the F-4 isn't just an iconic relic or museum piece from a forgotten time. It's a living, breathing piece of aviation history that's still in service today, with a career that's lasted longer than most of you watching this video have been alive. So get your favorite beverage ready and strap in as we take a deep dive into the story of the Phantom, exploring how this incredibly adaptable and advanced design became one of the most iconic and successful fighters of all time, and how the F-4 Phantom earned its reputation as the world's largest distributor of MiG parts. PilotPhotog.com. Like many legends, the origins of the Phantom is built on the shoulders of giants. The genesis of the F-4 takes us back over 70 years ago to the late 1940s. The end of the Second World War had ushered in the era of the jet age, with the Air Force's F-86 Sabre and the Navy's F-9F Panther, incredibly both first flying in 1947, just 2 years after World War II. And just 3 short years after that, the Korean War broke out, which featured the world's first jet-on-jet air combat. While the Air Force's F-86 Sabre held more than its own against the Soviet MiG-15s, the Navy's F-9F Panther was outclassed. Slow and underpowered, the Panther made a decent ground attack airplane, but its straight-wing design was lacking when it came to pure fighter combat. Because of this, the Navy quickly realized it needed a swept-wing, carrier-based fighter that would be a match for the MiG-15 and beyond. The answer to this problem would come straight out of St. Louis, with the introduction of McDonnell Aircraft's F3H Demon. The Demon first took to the skies in 1951, featuring swept wings, and was one of the first American fighters designed to rely primarily on missiles instead of cannons. However, it still carried 4 20mm cannons, a feature the Phantom would later wish it had. More on that in a moment. Despite more than 500 units being produced, roughly 3 times the number of F-22 Raptors, the F3H Demon is largely forgotten today. It found itself in an unfortunate position in the timeline of military aviation history. It was too late to make a significant impact on the Korean War and too early to see action in the Vietnam War. As a result, it never gained the combat reputation that could have solidified its place in history. And yet, although having a limited combat legacy, the Demon played a vital role in paving the way for the legendary F-4 Phantom. You can easily spot design similarities between the two aircraft. The F-3H introduced several key advancements that were refined and perfected in the F-4. These included a swept-wing design with improved speed and maneuverability, and its focus on missile armament over cannons, reflecting the ever-moving shift towards beyond visual range or BVR combat. The Demon's development and operational history also provided valuable lessons in jet engine technology. At the end of the day, while the F3H Demon may not have achieved lasting fame, it was an important stepping stone in the evolution of naval aviation, and laid the groundwork for the F-4 Phantom's success. Here's how. By 1953, McDonnell was well underway in their upgrades to the F3H. In doing this, they explored several variations, including a model with a Wright J67 engine, and others with dual Wright J65s or General Electric J79s. The J79 variant was especially promising, boasting a top speed of Mach 1.97. Based on these modifications, in September of 1953, McDonnell proposed the Super Demon to the U.S. Navy. This modular aircraft could switch between different mission profiles with ease, accommodating radar systems, cameras, cannons, or rockets. Although there was some Navy interest in a full-scale mock-up order, other projects like the Grumman XF9F9 and Vought XF8U1 seemed to cover the supersonic fighter needs. Despite this lack of a green light from the Navy, McDonnell re-envisioned their design as an all-weather fighter-bomber, leading to a letter of intent for 2 YAH-1 prototypes in October of 1954. However, by May of 1955, the Navy revised its requirements. They needed an all-weather fleet defense interceptor, incorporating advanced radar systems and a second crew member to handle the increased workload. From this, the XF-4H-1 prototype was born. Designed to carry Sparrow 3 radar-guided missiles and powered by 2 J79 GE engines, wind tunnel tests led to innovative wing designs, including the distinctive dogtooth and a swept-back leading edge for better control at high speeds. To meet carrier operation demands, the aircraft featured robust landing gear and a unique nose strut for optimal takeoff angles. In July of 1955, the Navy placed an order for 2 XF-4H-1 test aircraft and 5 YF-4H-1 pre-production models. History was made on the Phantom's maiden flight on 27 May 1958. The pilot was Robert C. Little, and during this flight, he faced minor hydraulic issues, but soon saw subsequent successful flights. Air intake redesigns and the addition of splitter plates greatly improved performance. By 1960, the Phantom had become carrier trials, solidifying its reputation. The Navy's preference for a twin-engine, two-seat design due to the cockpit workload led to the F-4H winning out over competitors. Initial production models featured J79 GE2 engines, and the aircraft successfully completed launch recovery cycles on the USS Independence. As the Phantom's success became evident, the Navy looked to settle on a nickname for the aircraft. Originally proposed nicknames like Satan and Mithras were passed over in favor of the less controversial Phantom II, a nod to the earlier F-H-1 Phantom. Briefly designated the F-110A and nicknamed Spectre by the USAF, in a fun bit of trivia information, the Phantom could technically be thought of as the last of the century fighters. However, in 1962, the Department of Defense decided that all branches of the military would use the same naming convention, known as the Tri-Service Designation System. Because of this, the jet was officially named the F-4 Phantom II. So how did the Air Force get interested in the Navy's Phantom? A key factor was then Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's push for greater unification across the military, standardizing everything from combat boots to the M16 rifle and even fighter planes. The Air Force's decision to adopt the Phantom came as a result to have a fly-off competition between the F-4B and a Convair F-106 Delta Dart. Known as Operation High Speed, the F-4 Phantom won, leading the Air Force to borrow 2 Navy F-4Bs, which they then used to develop their own requirements for a USAF fighter. Given its enormous fuel and payload capabilities, where the Navy emphasized fleet air defense for the Phantom, the Air Force leaned into a more air-to-air and air-to-ground fighter-bomber role. The first variant of the USAF Phantom was designated F-4C and first flew in May of 1963. It exceeded Mach 2 on its maiden flight. Incredible. The F-4 was produced at McDonnell's St. Louis plant, which earned it one of its many nicknames, the St. Louis Slugger. It's a fitting moniker for an aircraft with a massive takeoff weight of over 60,000 pounds. Despite its size and heft, the Phantom is no slouch in the sky, capable of reaching top speeds of over Mach 2.2 while boasting a climb rate of more than 41,000 feet per minute. This made it ideal for some of its roles as an interceptor and fleet defender. This weight and performance also gave rise to one of the sayings associated with the F-4. Given enough power, even a brick can fly. More on that in a minute. As a product of its time, the F-4 was designed without internal guns, reflecting the prevailing belief in missile-based combat during its development. This initial design philosophy proved to be somewhat short-sighted, as events in Vietnam would show. However, the Phantom was ahead of the curve in other areas, featuring cutting-edge technology like an advanced pulse Doppler radar and extensive use of titanium in its airframe. With the ability to carry over 18,000 pounds of diverse weaponry, from air-to-air and air-to-surface missiles to unguided bombs and even thermonuclear weapons, the F-4 set a new benchmark. Its Mach 2 performance, long range, and bomber-sized payload established the standard for the next generation of fighters. And when it came to going fast, well, speed is life became the mantra of F-4 pilots, as the Phantom's greatest strength in air combat was its acceleration and thrust. These qualities allowed skilled pilots to engage and disengage from fights on their terms. While MiGs often outturned the F-4 due to the high drag of its airframe, the Phantom's size and design, which focused on firing radar-guided missiles from beyond visual range, meant it lacked the agility while being prone to adverse yaw during hard maneuvers. Despite the risk of entering irrecoverable spins during aileron rolls, pilots found the F-4 responsive and manageable, even at the edge of its performance limits. In 1972, the F-4E model received a significant upgrade with the addition of leading-edge slats on the wings, which greatly improved high angle of attack maneuverability, though it did come at the cost of some top-end speed. Most pilots, however, felt it was worth it. We've mentioned the Phantom's high speed and high thrust capabilities. Central to the performance of the Phantom are its now legendary General Electric J79 engines. These incredibly powerful engines delivered more than enough thrust to make a brick or even house fly. In many ways, the J79 can be thought of as the best engine of its era, powering not just the Phantom, but the missile with a man in it, aka the F-104 Starfighter, and the supersonic B-58 Hustler bomber. In the Phantom, the J79s offered reduced lag time between throttle input and maximum thrust, compared to earlier engines. This quick response proved invaluable in situations like when John Cheshir's tailhook missed the resting gear on the midway. After mistakenly reducing the thrust to idle, he quickly slammed the throttle to full afterburner, and the J79 responded fast enough to get the Phantom airborne again successfully. When an aircraft is trying to land on a carrier and catch a wire and misses and has to go around, this maneuver is known as a bolter. However, the J79 did have a drawback. It produced noticeable black smoke at mid-throttle, making it easier for enemies to spot the aircraft. This issue was finally addressed 2 decades after the F-4 entered service, with the introduction of the F-4S model, which featured the -10A engine variant equipped with a smokeless combustor. Getting back to the internal gun or lack thereof situation, Cheshire described the absence of an internal gun in the F-4 as, quote, the biggest mistake. Adding further, quote, bullets are cheap and they tend to go where you aim them. I needed a gun and I really wish I had one, end quote. Marine Corps General John R. Daly echoed this statement saying, quote, everyone in RF-4s wish they had a gun on the aircraft, end quote. As we've mentioned, while the Phantom was being designed and for a time afterwards, the prevailing doctrine and part of the missile theory suggested that turning combat would be impossible at supersonic speeds. So little emphasis was placed on teaching pilots air combat maneuvering. However, in practice, engagements often became subsonic as pilots would slow down to maneuver behind their opponents. Compounding the issue, the early heat-seeking and radar-guided missiles of the era were notoriously unreliable, especially in the hot and humid environment found in Vietnam. This would cause pilots to ripple fire multiple shots to hit a single target. On top of this, the situation was further complicated by the Vietnam War's rules of engagement, which typically required visual identification, basically negating any advantage you'd have with a long-range missile. This left many pilots in the frustrating position of being on an enemy's tail but too close to effectively use their short-range Falcons or Sidewinders, hence the need for a gun. In response to these challenges, by 1965, the Air Force's F-4Cs began carrying the SUU-16 internal gun pods, which were equipped with a 20mm M61A1 Vulcan Gatling cannon. However, these early setups were hampered by the lack of lead computing gun sights, making accurate shots at a maneuvering dogfight nearly impossible. Some Marine Corps aircraft even carried 2 pods for strafing. Despite this drag-induced performance loss and the inaccuracy of the externally mounted guns, they proved far more cost-effective than missiles. Cooler heads finally prevailed when the F-4 gun deficiency was finally addressed with the F-4E variant. This Phantom featured an internally mounted 20mm M61A1 Vulcan cannon, providing the much-needed firepower that had been missing. Given the Phantom's long service life when it comes to operational history, an entire series of videos could be made on the topic. And if this video does well, I might just do that. Today, we'll take a quick overview of the Phantoms in service for the US Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, starting with its first customer, the Navy. On 30 December 1960, VF-121, the Peacemakers, at NAS Miramar, became the first squadron to operate the Phantom with their F4H-1Fs, which were later designated F4As. Shortly after, on 8 July 1961, the VF-74 Bedevilers at NAS Oceana received their first F4Bs, becoming the first deployable Phantom squadron. They completed carrier qualifications in October of 1961 and embarked on the Phantom's first full carrier deployment aboard the USS Forrestal from August 1962 to March of 1963. Following them, the VF-102 Diamondbacks became the second Atlantic Fleet squadron to receive F-4Bs, who promptly took their new aircraft on the shakedown cruise aboard the USS Enterprise. On the Pacific Fleet side, the VF-114 Aardvarks were the first to receive the F-4B, participating in the USS Kitty Hawk's cruise in September of 1962. By the time of the Tonkin Gulf incident in 1964, 13 of the Navy's 31 deployable squadrons were equipped with Phantoms. Initially, the Navy fighter pilots were unaccustomed to flying with a radar intercept officer, or RIO, instead of another pilot. But combat experience in Vietnam soon highlighted the benefits of having a guy in the back to help manage the workload. The Phantom's first air-to-air victory in the war occurred on 9 April 1965, when an F-4B from VF-96 Fighting Falcons, piloted by then Lieutenant Junior Grade Terrence M. Murphy and his RIO ensign Ronald Fagan, shot down a Chinese MiG-17. Unfortunately, the Phantom was then down, possibly by an AIM-7 Sparrow fired by one of its wingmen, though controversy remains over whether it was shot down by MiG guns or friendly fire. On 17 June 1965, an F-4B from the VF-21 Freelancers, piloted by Commander Louis Page and Lieutenant John C. Smith, achieved the first aerial victory against the North Vietnamese MiG. Another notable moment came on 10 May of 1972 when Lieutenant Randy Duke Cunningham and Lieutenant Junior Grade William P. Driscoll, flying an F-4J with a callsign Showtime 100, shot down 3 MiG-17s, making them the first American aces of the war. Their fifth kill was believed at the time to be against the mysterious North Vietnamese ace, Colonel Toon, now thought to be a myth. On their return flight, their Phantom was damaged by a surface-to-air missile. In an extraordinary display of skill, Cunningham and Driscoll managed to control their burning aircraft using only the rudder and afterburner until they could eject over water. During the course of the Vietnam War, US Navy F-4 Phantom squadrons completed 84 combat tours using F-4Bs, F-4Js, and F-4Ns. The Navy claimed 40 air-to-air victories at the cost of 73 Phantoms lost in combat, 7 of those losses coming from enemy aircraft, 13 from SAMs, and 53 to anti-aircraft artillery, or AAA. An additional 54 Phantoms were lost due to mishaps or accidents. In 1984, the Navy retired all F-4Ns from active service, and by 1987, the last F-4Ss were retired. On 25 March 1986, an F-4S from the VF-151 Vigilantes became the last active-duty Navy Phantom to launch from an aircraft carrier, the USS Midway. On 18 October 1986, an F-4S from VF-102 Superheats, a Naval Reserve Squadron, made the last ever Phantom carrier landing aboard the USS America. By 1987, the remaining Naval Reserve F-4Ss were replaced by F-14As. The last Phantoms in Navy service were used as QF-4Ns and QF-4S target drones by the Naval Air Warfare Center at NAS Point Mugu, California, where they were retired in 2004. As for the Marine Corps, they received their first F-4Bs in June of 1962, with VFMA 314 Black Knights at MCAS El Toro, California, becoming the first operational squadron. Marine Phantoms from VMFA 323 provided air cover during Operation Power Black in the Dominican Republic and later supported combat operations in Vietnam. Marine F-4 pilots claimed 3 enemy MiGs during the war, although they suffered 75 combat losses, mostly due to ground fire. The Marine Corps also flew the RF-4B variant, with VMCJ-1 Golden Hawks conducting photo reconnaissance missions from Da Nang starting on 3 November 1966. Despite the incredible hazards, they suffered only 1 aircraft damage by anti-aircraft artillery during their deployment. The Marine Corps continued to operate the F-4 in both active and reserve units throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The transition to the FA-18 Hornet began in the early 1980s, with VMFA 314 being the first squadron to switch over. The last Marine Corps Phantom, an F-4S, was retired on 18 January 1992 by the VMFA 1112 Cowboys at NAS Dallas, Texas, marking the end of an era as the squadron also transitioned to the FA-18 Hornet. Although the F-4 was initially designed for the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force would go on to become the largest user of the Phantom. The first USAF Phantoms to arrive in Vietnam were F-4Cs from the 43rd Tactical Fighter Squadron in December of 1964. Unlike the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, which operated the Phantom with a naval aviator in the front seat and a radar intercept officer in the back, the USAF initially flew the Phantom with pilots in both seats. This setup was not popular as pilots disliked being in the back seat where visibility and instruments were limited. The Air Force later switched to having a navigator in the rear seat, designated as a Weapons System Officer or WISO, to better manage the targeting and weapon systems. As with the Navy, the Air Force Phantom quickly proved its worth in combat. On 10 July 1965, F-4Cs from the 45th Tactical Fighter Squadron, temporarily stationed in Thailand, achieved the USAF's first victories against North Vietnamese MiG-17s using AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. The Phantom continued to demonstrate its capabilities, with F-4C scoring the first aerial victory against the MiG-21 in April of 1966. However, the Phantom also suffered losses. In July of 1965, it became the first American aircraft shot down by a surface-to-air missile, or SAM. In October of 1966, an F-4C was the first U.S. jet lost to a surface-to-air missile in the conflict. Early models of the F-4 faced several challenges, including fuel tank leaks, wing cracks, and issues with control systems and engine fires. The RF-4C reconnaissance variant made its debut in Vietnam in October of 1965, performing hazardous post-strike reconnaissance missions. The USAF Thunderbirds also flew the F-4E from 1969 to 1974. Although the F-4C was nearly identical to the Navy's F-4B in performance, the USAF initially equipped the F-4D with AIM-4 Falcon missiles. However, these missiles, designed for engaging heavy bombers, were unreliable in combat against agile fighters. The F-4D was eventually re-equipped with the more effective AIM-9 Sidewinder under the Rivet Haste program in 1968, and the AIM-7E-2 Dogfight Sparrow became their preferred missile by 1972. The F-4D also received radar warning receivers to detect and help defend against Soviet-built SAMs. Throughout the Vietnam War, the F-4 Phantom played a vital role in both air superiority and ground attack missions, supporting ground troops and conducting bombing sorties across Southeast Asia. As the F-105 suffered heavy losses, the F-4 took on a larger role as the USAF's primary tactical bomber. In October of 1972, the first squadron of EF-4G Wild Weasel aircraft deployed to Thailand, specializing in the suppression of enemy air defenses, or SEAD missions. 16 squadrons of Phantoms were permanently deployed to Southeast Asia between 1965 and 1973, with 17 others rotating on temporary combat assignments. At its peak in 1972, the USAF had 353 combat Phantoms based in Thailand. By the end of the war, the USAF had lost 445 Phantoms, including 370 in combat, with 193 of those losses over North Vietnam. The RF-4C variant, operated by 4 squadrons, suffered 83 losses, with 72 in combat. By the Vietnam War's end, the combined losses of USAF, Navy, and Marine Corps Phantoms totaled 761 aircraft. However, the F-4 also produced several aces during the Vietnam War. On 28 August of 1972, Captain Steve Ritchie became the first USAF ace of the war. Wizzo Captain Charles B. de Bellevue later became the highest-scoring American ace of the war with 6 victories, and Wizzo Captain Jerry Feinstein became the last USAF ace on 13 October 1972. Upon returning to the U.S., both de Bellevue and Feinstein transitioned to flying as pilots in the F-4. Before we wrap up our discussion on the Vietnam era, we can't overlook perhaps the most famous Phantom pilot of them all, Robin Olds. His legendary exploits will be featured in an upcoming video, so stay tuned. The Phantom continued to serve beyond Vietnam, with the Illinois National Guard becoming the first Air National Guard unit to transition to the Phantom in 1972. Phantoms equipped various USAF, National Guard, and Reserve units over the years. Although today largely remembered for its service in the Vietnam War, the Phantom also played roles in later conflicts, including Operation Classic Resolve in 1989, where Phantoms took off from Clark Air Force Base and helped quell a coup attempt in the Philippines. In 1991's Operation Desert Storm, F-4G Wild Weasels and RF-4Cs were deployed to Bahrain, with the Wild Weasel taking the critical and dangerous role of suppressing enemy air defenses. The last USAF Phantoms were retired in 1996, marking the end of an era for this iconic aircraft in U.S. service. When it comes to operators that have flown or still fly the Phantoms, well, like a famous movie quote, the list of Phantom operators is long and distinguished. When it comes to non-US operators, the Phantom has served with Australia, Egypt, Germany, Greece, Iran, Israel, Japan, South Korea, Spain, and the United Kingdom. And as mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Phantom is still in active duty service, flying in the air forces of Iran, Turkey, Greece, and South Korea today. Among other nations that have flown or still fly the Phantom, the jet has earned many unique nicknames. And perhaps my favorite of them all is given by German air crews, which I'll do my best to pronounce here. Luftverteidigungsdiesel, or Air Defense Diesel. How cool is that? During the course of its service, McDonnell issued a series of patches which imitated the spelling of the aircraft names. Pilots became Phantom Flyers, and backseaters became Phantom Ferrets. Fans of the F-4 are referred to as Phantom Fanatics, and I count myself as one of them, and they call it the Phabulous Phantom. Ground crewmen who worked on the aircraft are known as Phantom Fixers, and as my own personal tribute to this amazing jet, I made an updated logo of the iconic Phantom mascot. You can get this logo as a patch, sticker, or even on a mug if you'd like to help support my channel and have a cool conversation piece at the same time. It's difficult to overstate the Phantom's legacy, along with its still ongoing 70+ years of service and setting 15 world records for in-flight performance. Perhaps the greatest testament to the Phantom is how many different airframes it took to replace it. Remember, the Phantom served not just as a fleet defender and interceptor, but also as an interdictor aircraft, tactical bomber, nuclear delivery platform, a suppression of enemy air defenses platform, a reconnaissance aircraft, and numerous other roles. The lessons learned from the Phantom service, in the Vietnam War especially, led directly to the development of 4th generation fighters, also known as the Teen series of fighters. Starting with the Navy's F-14 Tomcat, which was envisioned from the ground up as a direct replacement for the Phantom in its fleet defender role, to the Air Force's F-15 Eagle in the air superiority/interceptor role. These two aircraft are unarguably direct descendants of the Phantom, large, fast, twin-engine beasts that are made to dominate the skies. The smaller F-16 Fighting Falcon, aka Viper, and FA-18 Hornet would perform some of the roles that were typically served by the Phantom, especially in air-to-ground missions, with much better maneuverability at the expense of range and loiter time. In a way, we've come full circle today, as the F-35 Lightning conceptually fills the same idea that the Phantom became, an aircraft for the Navy, Air Force, and Marines, which is available and used by the US's allies. Because of this, you could say that the Phantom is the original Joint Strike Fighter. As many of you watching know, I usually make my own animations. However, for this video I relied heavily on the Digital Combat Simulator, or DCS, along with Heatblur's phenomenal Phantom model. The team at Heatblur spent years developing this F4 model and flight characteristics. And while I'm not associated with them or DCS in any way, I wanted to give them a shout out. DCS is free to play, and you can purchase Heatblur's amazing F4 model on the website. I'll leave a link in the description. And for DCS enthusiasts looking to elevate their gameplay, Fox 3 Servers offers an unparalleled solution. As a partner of this channel, I've had the pleasure of using their turnkey hosted servers, which handle all the technical details, allowing me to focus entirely on creating content. Whether you're flying with a couple of friends or leading a virtual squadron, their servers provide the stability and performance needed for an immersive experience. I relied heavily on Fox 3 servers for this F4 Phantom video, and this seamless setup made capturing top quality footage a breeze. If you're serious about your DCS experience and want a reliable, hassle-free server solution, I highly recommend giving Fox 3 servers a try. Their expertise allows you to skip the complicated setup and dive straight into the action. Check them out, link in the description below, and take your DCS missions to the next level. A big thank you to my channel members and patrons. You go above and beyond in supporting my efforts, and I truly appreciate it. Most people who watch this video won't make it this far. On average, less than a third of the audience is left by this point in the video. But as I wrap up this video, I want to share a special memory that has stuck with me throughout my life. When I was a boy, my dad's friend who flew Phantoms invited us to visit the base and check out his airplane. I remember climbing up into the cockpit, sitting in the seat and marveling at the controls up close. This was like something from another world come to life. I had seen pictures and I knew what a Phantom was even at that age. But sitting in the cockpit, seeing all the gauges, switches, the feel, the smell, just the overall experience, it's almost undescribable. And to all of you who work, fly, maintain, design, handle, direct military aircraft, you're awesome. What you do is exceptional. That moment sitting in the Phantom sparked my imagination and fueled even further my lifelong passion for aviation. It's one of those core memories that took my love for flight to the next level and really set me on the path I'm on today. Telling stories about airplanes. Thank you for watching and letting me share my story of, in my opinion, the greatest of all time, the F-4 Phantom. Now you know. PilotPhotog.com